Hello, my name is Dag-Inge.
And I'm Ida. And I want to tell you today, but first I want to tell you about a law that we have in Norway. Actually, inaccessible websites are illegal in Norway. This is a law that has been in effect. This is a law that has been in effect since July 2014. It had unanimous support in our parliament. It was backed by NGOs and also the industry in Norway. So the whole industry and everyone really basically agreed, this is a good idea, let's do it. And what's interesting also is often laws like these are just applied to the public sector. But in Norway, it also applies to the private sector. So if you're a bank, if you're an airline, you also have to follow the law. And how it's defined is that anything that is, can be considered a main channel to offer services or information to the general public has to be accessible. That's pretty broad. And the thing also, so when we say accessibility in this context, it's based on the the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.0. Not all of the AA criteria, but most of them. So all of the ones that are in green are under the law. We have like a bunch of links and resources, so that a link that we share afterwards, and then you can get all of the details if you want to know. And the thing is, there's a bunch of countries that also have these laws, but in Norway, they can also have consequences. So there's a state agency called DIFI. They make random controls and check the websites according to the criteria and publish the report online. This is the things that this company has to fix, and it's all public and online. And I think it's a year or 2 years ago, VCAG was actually making headlines in Norway. These are headlines from 2 of Norway's largest newspapers, and the headline, SAS is a Norwegian airline, and the headline says, SAS fails, SAS is risking fines. And the interesting thing is, like, it was in all of the newspapers, it was making headlines, and the story was not only that it made them look, well, you know, following the law, but it also made them look incompetent. You don't understand technology, because there was such a broad support from the industry and also from the parliament, it just made them look stupid. So accessibility is not really something just a question about morals anymore in Norway, because I think it's something you should do anyway, but it's also you're risking bad press, fines, stuff like that. So back to us. This is our company, and this is our entire company. We all fit into a selfie. And we're based out of Norway. That's why we have to care about this law. This is some Norwegian fjords for you, in case you were doubting that we were from Norway. And so, as was mentioned, what we're trying to do is, just to give you a little bit of context, what we're trying to do is to make super easy video calling. So the thing is, and it's in the browser, so you can just like send someone a link, and they can open it on any device, and then you're in the call. Oh, so I have to be careful with the clicker here. Yeah, in the call. So the thing is, and there's a couple of people that do this, but why Colors comes into this is that the people that use our service are businesses or professionals. So it could, for instance, be your physician that's offering video appointments. Maybe you have a cold, like I have today actually, and maybe you want to talk to your therapist even though you're traveling. Or maybe sometimes you would want to learn something from a professional, and the person that's best suited to teach you this is on the other side of the world. Like if I want to learn Japanese, it's probably better to get a teacher that's in Japan. And the thing also, these people, they have the brands. You know, they already have businesses. So if they're going to offer the services, they would like to brand their video calls. So just to give you a little bit more like an image of who our client could be, this is Siri. She's amazing. Siri von Krogh, she's a midwife. She's been running, giving advice to people about pregnancy and newborns for like, on the internet, almost 20 years now. This is a Google, it's called everythingformom.no. This is a Google Translate. So this is what she does. She knows, she's a midwife, she knows everything about giving advice as a midwife. She's not a designer, she's not a developer. So maybe, because she lets people ask questions about pregnancy online, maybe that's a good format for video too. Okay, so it's a case. So, okay, what does this have to do with accessibility? So let's like wheel it all up. The thing is, if you let people brand something, the first thing you would think of is color. But if we let people pick any color, what about the contrasts? In a bunch of services, I'm not here to bash, just to give some well-known examples. For instance, if I choose our yellow for my profile at Twitter, the contrast is not good enough. Or if I choose yellow for our intercom messenger, the contrast really isn't good enough. I have to pick another color to make sure that the contrast is sufficient. And then I have to know that. That's specialty knowledge to know what contrast is. Not everybody knows that. So here we are. The CEO was like, well, I want both. I wanted to be, can we just let people just pick any color, and then we just make sure that it's accessible? So that's a questionnaire from my CEO, and then that's Ingvild, our senior engineer. Ivan is a designer, and Dag-Inge, and I was also here because I took the photo. Yeah, so that was the thing that we were trying to figure out.
OK, but to get everyone on the same page, I think a lot of us know that intuitively colors have contrast towards each other. But what does actually the VCAG requirements say for contrast color? So it says that the visual presentation of text and images of text has to have a contrast ratio of at least 4.5 to 1. And for large text, that same requirement is 3 to 1. One of the new things now is that in 2.1 specification that just came out, also non-text elements like interface elements, buttons and the likes, and icons also have to have sufficient contrast ratio. But yeah, so what exactly is contrast? So it turns out that contrast has a definition. But to gather that, it's important to understand one thing first. And that is that according to VCAG, every single color has what's called a relative luminance, or a lightness ratio, basically telling you how light a color is, from 0, which is pitch black, to 1, which is bright white. And to get the contrast between two colors, you do it like this. So you take the luminance of the lighter color plus a constant, 0.05. That's just to avoid any division by zero issues and stuff like that. And then you divide that by the luminance of the darker color, like here. And that gives you the color contrast ratio. To give you a proper example, let's look at this button right here. It's a yellow button with black text on it. So together, the contrast ratio between the text color and the background here, we take the luminance of the yellow and divide that by the luminance of the black, and we arrive at 12.4. As we know, that is larger than 4.5, which means that this has sufficient contrast according to requirement and according to the law.
Actually, researching this and understanding where that number came from was just so, because we always put it into some calculator. No, yeah, that's the right number. It was like, but where does it come from? Now we know. So the thing is, there's nothing really wrong with this yellow button. This is our default. This is, and then maybe someone comes along that's like a doctor or something. Doctors like blue, and their brand color is dark blue. And now it's suddenly kind of hard to read the button. But if you're a designer and there's a quite easy solution to this from a design perspective. Let's just flip the text of the button to white instead. And then the contrast is sufficient. And then we were thinking about, well, what about gray? Will it work for everything? But actually, if you think about the math that we just went through, when the criteria is 4.5, if you have either black text or white text, it will actually validate against any color. Even any color, shade of gray, will either validate against white or black. So there you have the solution. Maybe you can just fix that for me?
Sure. OK, so Ingvild and I, we sat down and we started going about this problem. And we started thinking, this was way before we knew anything about color contrast or how that was defined. We started thinking, what if we could do math on colors? Wouldn't that be kind of cool? I mean, intuitively, colors in computing are bits or numbers. So we should be able to do calculations on numbers, right? And it turns out we're not the first one to think of this. There's an NPM package for that, actually. Because, of course, there's an NPM package for that. So the NPM package color lets you do a lot of cool stuff with colors. It can manipulate or convert colors. It can rotate them. It can mix them with other colors. You can check their lightness ratio. You can also test their VCAG color contrast and more. But there's one problem here. All of this is in JavaScript, and we don't really want to do all these calculations for every single component on our entire page. Ideally, we'd want to do this once, and then apply that or store that in some kind of variable that we can use in our style sheet. And as Mike just told you, we can do that now. So just in case you were out for that talk, I'm going to run through it for like 1 minute and just tell you the basics again. So CSS custom properties allows you to define variables in CSS, basically. That means you can reuse color definitions and more. They can even be complex values throughout your style sheet. And they are cascading, and they can be overwritten. The syntax looks like this. You use the double dash notation to define a custom property, and you assign it a value. And then you can use that using the var keyword, like so. You can also manipulate these from JavaScript using the set property function. The first argument is the name of the custom property, and the second one is the value. This also works for inline styles. If you're using JSX, that is one approach you can use as well. I think that's pretty neat. But back to our problem. So to solve this, first things first, we should import the color library. Then we create an instance of color with our brand color, or whatever brand color the customer wanted. It can either be hard-coded like here, or do like us. We load it from the backend and apply it asynchronously at runtime for our entire application. Then we can simply check if the primary color is light. And if it is, the contrast color is assigned to black. And if it isn't, it's assigned to white. Then you simply set that using the set property tag back to your CSS. And in your button component, you set the background color with var and the text color to the contrast color, like so. And it automatically updates. Now, there's a bunch of different best use cases here, and Mike talked a lot about those. But be diligent and use custom variables throughout if you're going for this approach for theming. Otherwise, you get into issues later. And set sensible defaults to avoid any flash of unwanted content. What's neat about this is that when we change this at runtime, everything updates at the same time, which is really nice.
Yeah, so that was a bunch of buttons, and that was the talk, and thanks for coming. Or, wait a second. The thing is, what we have guaranteed now is that you will always be able to read the text on the button. But what if someone comes along and they have a really light brand color? Where did that button go? So even you can still read the text, you might not even understand that it is a button at all. So the thing that we figured then is, well, what we would typically do then, maybe what if we could have like a darker version of the same color and add an outline so that we will be sure that people will still see the button even if the brand color is really light. You want to fix that too?
Right, so this problem is a bit more complex, right? Because there's actually two problems here. First, we need to generate a secondary color, a darker primary color, which is as close to the primary color as possible, but still validates against our background color, which in this case is white. And the second problem is that we want to add a conditional border that only gets applied if the primary color is lighter than the minimum contrast ratio. So how do you do that? Well, remember color.js again? So I told you that it allows you to mix colors and test contrast. Oh, I was supposed to click here. Yeah, so but intuitively, if you want to make a darker color in real life, this is the first problem. If you have a palette with a color that you want to make darker, you would take a little bit of black and mix that in until you get the desired color. That was sort of the thing for that. OK, so let's try to make a function that can do this for us. So the function getValidateColor takes a couple of arguments. It takes the color that we want to change, in this case, our primary color. It takes the color that we want to validate against. It defaults to white. It takes the minimum contrast ratio that we want to achieve. And it takes a mixing amount. This is 0.5. It's quite important that this is a bit low. Because imagine the same palette that you had earlier, and you take a bucket of black paint and you pour it all over. The end result is going to be black, and you made a mess. Right? So that's not going to work. You have to do it in small baby steps to get a proper color. Then, of course, last, you take the mixing color. So let's look at the body of this function. So first things, let's generate a new color using the mix function. So with the color that we want to change, mix, and we mix that with the mixing color and the mixing amount. Then we check if the new color's contrast towards white is less than the minimum contrast ratio. And if it is, we call the function again, this time with the new color as the color we want to change, and a smaller mixing amount. We just do it very, very close. Until eventually, we get a color that validates against white. Now, some of the engineers here might think, well, haven't you made a function that could potentially run forever? And the thing is that black will always validate against white, at least for the minimum contrast ratio. There is no chance of this actually running forever. You will always end up with a color that does validate against white. And once we have that, we can simply call the function with a primary color and get the primary color, a darker primary color, back. And we set that back into our CSS. So, on to our next problem, adding a conditional button border. How would you do that? Well, in the normal case, there is no border at all. So let's tackle that problem first. So we create a custom variable, custom property, that has the button border, which has the default value of none. And then we assign that to the border property of our button. And now, presto, we have a button with no border. But in our CSS, we can say, if the primary color's contrast against white is less than the minimum contrast ratio, update that property and set it to 2 pixels solid and our darker primary color. And that means that now we have a conditional border that will only show up if the color that the customer has set is less than the minimum contrast ratio.
Yeah. So just to sum it up a little bit, so for instance, if we have the color yellow, we will generate lighter and darker versions of that because we'll also use that for other interface elements like hovering and stuff like that. If we have a darker color, we would change the text to white and then also have the lighter and the darker. If the color is really light, we add a border and also have these lighter and darker ones. But then, so they're doing the math in the back here and me and the designer working together, and you would also think, well, aren't you done now? What more is there? Like, how many colors do you really need on the website? And the designer was like, well, what about secondary colors? And you should never base any functionality on color alone because of color blindness. But for people that do see the whole spectrum, it can actually be kind of confusing if everything is like really strong in the same yellow. It's going to be overwhelming. And he's like, if you have a brand, you typically have more colors. And my role in the company is to work with user friendliness and usability and UX. And I was like, oh my God, I'm trying to imagine how I'm going to explain to the user, yeah, pick one color, and we're going to use this for that, and pick another color, and we're going to use this for that. And I was like, this is never going to work. We have to make it so simple. We just ask them for one color, and then we just fix the other one. So again, we're thinking, well, we figured these other things out. How can we go about, can we try to generate the secondary color somehow? So just to give you an example, this is like our default colors. So what we would want, we're using the secondary colors here, for instance, if there's a notification or like a warning or something like that. So ideally, we want a color that fits with the original brand color, that doesn't crash too much, but also seems like a different color. And when you think about it, like looks nice together, but it's kind of different. Where's the math in that? The other ones were quite clear. It was like, is there a number for that? Looks nice together, but it's kind of different. So we were discussing, trying to well, there has to be a pattern here. So we discussed this with our designer. So when you make brands, from the ground up, how do you go about choosing the secondary colors? And he started talking about color wheels. There's like a bunch of different people. For hundreds of years, people have thought about colors and the concept of color wheels. It's not really important what color wheel we're talking about there, just the concept of color wheels. And the thing is then how all of these are represented. If you go on the top here, and then you try to move, what he said is like, well, I try to just move slightly down the circle until we find something that looks like a new color, but it still goes good together. So you don't go all the way around the circle, because then it's going to look quite horrible. And then I'm going to introduce you to a newer color wheel. These are quite old, but then here we have the HSL color wheel. So HSL color is built up by 3 values. You have hue, which is a degree from 0 to 360 degrees, so that's important for us. And then we also have saturation, and then we have lightness. So actually, this color wheel expresses exactly what our designer was talking about. Because what if we could just rotate the hue? So for instance, if we're up here, the brand color is red, we would rotate it, and we're like, and I discussed this with like a developer, like, how did you come up with this number of 60 degrees? It's like, no, we just went with 60 degrees. That's just like a gut feeling thing. So like, there's no math behind 60. That's just intuition. That's just competence of our designer. 60 degrees, we looked around the circle like, yeah, that's going to work. And you know, there was some math there after all.
Yeah. So going into this, we thought, well, this is going to be super hard to do. But as it turns out, it really isn't. Because you just use, all in color.js, you can use the rotate property and get another color. And what it does essentially is just add the hue degrees in CSS. And actually, funny thing is, we've been fretting about this talk for maybe 2 months now and tried to go over and find stuff we could improve. And then we meet Mike earlier, and then we've been talking a bit, but he shows me this demo of actually you can do all of this in CSS, and I'm like, damn it. I wish I'd done that or thought of that before. Yeah. So with this, you get a secondary color. You can set that back into our CSS. And we can also use the same functions to generate darker or lighter variants of that as well. OK, so now we have a bunch of rules. How can we actually bring that back together into a theme engine? So what we did is that we created a React component that we call theme. And what this component does is that it takes a property brand color, which we load asynchronously, and it uses that to calculate all other colors according to our rule set. And when working like this, it's important to remember that you never hard code these values anywhere in your CSS. You always use CSS custom properties, because what you get out of it is a single style sheet that is infinitely brandable. You can apply it to any color, and it gives you a decent result back. And this also means that you can do a lot of cool performance things. For example, you don't have to do server-side rendering to generate a new CSS for every single customer. You can just store one value and then apply it at runtime. And this means you can cache the CSS forever, for example. You can also do critical path rendering and stuff like that. And you don't have to do that for every single organization that you might serve. And using the theme component looks like this. So theme applies all these custom properties to its own element. And thanks to CSS, when we wrap our entire app component in it, every rule will, or every color will apply to every component inside that. And this is also infinitely nestable. So for example, we want to give a rich preview that updates in real time for the customer to see how their color looks in real time. And we can do that. We just wrap the preview in a new theme component, and it doesn't affect anything else on the page, which is really neat. Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing is, now we could like confidently say to Zero, yeah, just pick any color you like. It's not her job to think about the accessibility law. That's our job. And what I think is really fun here is that when we put in her brand color, which is pink, look at, can you see this automatically generated secondary color there in the progress bar? And then look at her logo. So the algorithm actually went for a secondary color that's basically the same that was already in her logo. So it's like, it's sometimes nice to have a designer in your team to just give you the algorithm. That's how you make a brand. Well, maybe not that easy. But anyway, so this is with this simple thing, now like if people pick different colors, it still has like really this clear picture of their brand. It looks very differently depending on the color that you pick, but it's still the same elements and really like brings the brand forward. So of course there's going to be a demo. So now if you can pray to the demo god.
I promised myself I would never do a live demo on stage, but I'm going to do it anyway, and it's going to work, I promise.
Yeah.
So here we built a tester that lets you test out all these colors using the color picker for input. And you can see in real time here that now we have applied the border property live. And if I, for example, go here, you have some darker colors, and it works. And you can see all the colors.
Maybe if you scroll down, you see the buttons too.
Yeah. OK, so here are some test things. So even if I pick bright white, that actually works. And you can rotate this around. And it's really fast and snappy, thanks to we only do this once. We set it into CSS, and it automatically updates everywhere.
And we can try looking at it with color blindness, too.
Yeah, so we have a What's it called again? Oh,
Yeah, that's the blue one.
Yeah, but if I click, there we go. Oh yeah, so let's try, for example, red week. Yeah, that looks good. How about monochromatic? Yeah, so that looks good. Yeah. So this also works for different kinds of color blindness.
And so there's a link where you can test this. So it would be really fun if someone manages to break it or find the color where the automatic thing just makes does a horrible job. That would be fun, and just tweet us with it and there's a hole. But it doesn't look that good with red. I don't know what's wrong with red and yellow. The algorithm fails there. Yeah.
Definitely not done.
Yeah. So the thing is, we're going to leave this link up a little bit. So we've been talking here about accessibility and accessibility law, and it is, of course, important for me to just underline that this means in no way that I believe that our team is done with accessibility, and I don't think accessibility is a thing that you can never think of as done. But it does go through everything that we do online. If it's performance or usability and accessibility, just has to be intertwined with the work that you do and something you do continuously. But I think that I want to bring to you is that through this process, it became really clear to us that
Sorry.
you just pressed the keyboard.
But I thought that I saw the menu on top there.
And then it's a team effort. Yeah, as you can see here, a great team effort. It's so much better when you work together and someone can click the keys for you. But the thing is, we were an interdisciplinary team, and I don't think we would ever have come up with a solution if we would have been working on it on our own. There's a combination that made this possible. And I really love this law. I think it's wonderful. I don't see it as a constraint or something, oh no, we have to make it accessible. It's not a deterrent to us at all. And I think that for developers or designers, I think what almost all of us really love with our jobs is these challenges. When you get these puzzles, how am I going to solve this? And suddenly you find the aha moments. And that's such a satisfying feeling. And accessibility can give you a bunch of those. And in that perspective, this is one of the most fun things that I've done. And it's a good thing for someone that's a bonus. It's fun, and you're making the product accessible for more people. As I mentioned here, a demo and resource. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you.